All right, good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday evening. It's greatly appreciated. Welcome to our 12-day countdown student conference. My name is Everett Daniels. I am currently the third and fourth grade math MCL at Thompson Elementary.
And I am Brittany Bogan, third and fourth grade RLA MCO at Thompson.
And again, we thank you for joining us, but please make sure to stay for the whole presentation to take our survey and also so you can take attendance and get credit for this session. And at any time throughout the session, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we will definitely address them at the end of the session. Our what? Every student, every teacher, every day. Student outcomes, equity, well-being, leadership, opportunities, and engagement. So today here, we're going to be focusing on student outcomes and equity.
Theory of action. An aligned curriculum with corresponding progress measures supported by differentiated professional development and implemented with fidelity results in increased student achievement.
Our why. North Star goal. By 2027, Spring ISD will increase the percentage of students in A and B schools from 27% to 50% and decrease the percentage of students in D and F schools from 46% to 0%. By 2027, Spring ISD will increase the number of A and B schools from 12 to 19 and decrease the number of schools that scored D and F from 16 to 0.
So we're going to go ahead and jump right into our topic for today, which is student conferences. And here is an example of a layout that we use here on campus at Thompson Elementary. And what it does is break down the STAR goals throughout the school year for our students. So this is something that we will implement at the beginning of the school year, right after we take our BOI for our MAP. And then we reassessed and reevaluate this document throughout the school year to just make those updates to make sure our STAR goals are aligned to what our current status is for our students. So while we're using this document, we want to make sure that they are also aligned with our, like my personal T-test goals. So if we take a look here at the different categories, we have masters, meets, high approaches, and high did not meets. Now, when we're breaking down these categories, I'm looking over here at this pink area. Here is going to be the breakdown for my end of the year goal. So for the end of the year, I would like for 70% of my students to be at the approaches level, while 55% will be at the meets level. How do I get there? So by breaking down these categories, I have, and again, these are pretend students. So I have it broken down. We have these scholars that are currently in high did not meets. They're in approaches, high approaches, meets, and masters. So what we want to talk about in our focus for today is how do we move those students that are in high did not meets, approaches, and high approaches, how do we shift those students over to our meets and masters categories so that their goals can align with what we are trying to do for Spring ISD? And again, we want to make sure that the students know what their goal is. So we're going to be conferencing with them to let them know, like, hey, this is where you currently are, but this is our overall goal for you for the end of the year. And this is how you contribute to our overall whole class goal. And that follows up with this slide here. So we want to make sure that we are providing visuals for student progression throughout the school year. So this is an example from a teacher here at Thompson Elementary, and we have our third and our fourth grade students, and we are going to consistently visit this chart to show the students after every assessment, whether it's a weekly assessment, a unit assessment, or even our district assessments, where they currently stand. So that way, when we're meeting with our individual students for their conferences, they can look at their number, because at the beginning of the year, we assign all of the students numbers so that we know, for us teachers, who the students are when we're looking at this visual in the classroom, but it's so that the other students aren't saying like, hey, look where you're at, you're here, you're there, so we don't put their names on there. But if we're looking at this, we can have this visual setup, and I'm going to focus in over here for fourth grade. So after this particular assessment, we have about 5 students that were in masters, we have 6 that were in meets, 4 students that were in approaches, and then we have 2 students that were in did not meets. So the conversations that we're having with those individual students is like, hey, we're going to look at number 12. Your goal was actually 80%. So they have their goals written on right on the sticky note right underneath their number, but we want to also make sure that they're aware of their goal and where they currently stand. So for this student, the conversation's kind of different. So their goal is 80, but because they scored here in the high did not or the in the did not meet, we want to make sure that we're emphasizing to that student the importance of, okay, how are we going to get you back over here to our meets and our masters category? And then that turns into our whole group discussion. So because we have this visual up after each assessment, the kids are like, did you update the chart? Did you update the chart? For example, at our campus, we're in our STAR action plan. So every Friday, we're working on those assessments over those deficit teaks that we've been testing all week long. So one of the students today, she saw me in the hallway in passing. She was a fourth grade student, but she hadn't made it to my class yet. But she knew that I had been tracking her score and the rest of the students while they were testing. She's like, Miss Bogan, have you updated the chart yet? Have you updated the chart yet? I'm like, no, not yet, not yet, but it'll be updated by the time you come back to class. So that just goes to show the importance of consistently having those individual conversations with them, but also having those whole group conversations with them so that they can see the progression for individualized and whole group for the meets and masters category.
Thank you. Ms. Bogan, if you don't mind, can you go back to that previous slide,
Sure
please? Because I
can.
didn't see that. So to discuss what Ms. Bogan was saying, at the end of the day, your scholars in your classroom, 9 times out of 10, they're going to find out each other's number. It never fails. But I'm a very visual person myself, and this is not just for me, like Ms. Bogan said, this is for the scholars so they can see. So for example, if I'm number 8, I know I'm in masters. But deep down, I know who number 12 is, and number 12 is my good friend. So we have built that climate environment in our classroom to where we're not making fun of anybody, we're building each other up. So if my friend is number 12, I know that when we're working in stations or when we are allowed to collaborate with each other, I'm going to work with my friend because I know my friend is struggling. So this is also another purpose of having these visuals in the classroom. So that way, not only are the scholars learning from their teacher, but they're also learning from each other when it comes time to that collaboration time in our classroom. Thank you, Mrs. Bogan.
Thank you for adding that.
Now, when you're looking at this, this is the map report. So this is going to be coming from a teacher's point of view, teacher's lens. So if you see here, this shows the data of each scholar and how they did on their map test. So you can see it has their grade, their test date, their RIT score, their percentile, and how long they took during the assessment. Now, if you look here to the right side, it's broken up into 4 categories along with low, low average, high average. So if you look here, category A is numerical representation and relationship. Category B is computations and algebraic relationships. Category C, geometry and measurement. And category D, data analysis and monetary transactions. You may also hear it as category 1, 2, 3, or 4, but they're interchangeable. They mean the exact same thing. So let's take a look at the scholar that's boxed in on our screen. So you can take a look and see in category A, they were low average. Category B, they were high average. Category C, they were low average. In category D, they were high average. Ms. Bogan, if you don't mind, could you just use your pointer and point to each rating so they can see it in the box for me, please? So again, you can see that's what they scored in each of those categories right there. So as a teacher, I'm like, okay, out of the 2, they were high average, and out of the other 2, they were low average. So that's going to grab my attention as the teacher to focus in on that scholar. And that's when you're having those conferences with each of your scholar to dissect their data. So when I'm conferencing in with this particular student, I just want to make sure that as all of us are aware, inside of each category, there are particular teaks that are housed in each one. So when I'm conferencing with this particular scholar, I'm pulling up category A, and we're looking at the TEKS that's inside of category A. So inside of my math classroom, every scholar in my room knows they know what TEKS are. They know what TEK we're focusing on, and they know the description of each TEK, because I make sure that they're understanding the total of all of their learning. So inside of category A, I would conference with that particular scholar and show them the TEKS inside of category A and so forth in category C, but then they would also take a look at category B and D so they can see their strengths of what they were strong at. And then they would more so focus on their low average TEKS of where they scored at. And then you can also go to lead forward to where you can get a snapshot of every grade level for third, fourth, and fifth. So you can see what particular TEKS are housed in each category. Now, on this screen right here, this is going to be the student accountability piece. You have did all your conferencing already according to the MAP data. And again, you can conference every day. You can conference at the end of the week, or you can conference whenever you take big major district assessments. It's all as a teacher, you have the autonomy because you're the one that knows your scholars the best. So in my classroom, after I'm done conferencing with all my scholars, we're going to take a look here at category 1 or category A, and category A is numerical representation and relationship. So as you can see, the TEKS that are highlighted in green, those are our readiness TEKS, and the TEKS that are highlighted in yellow, those are our supporting TEKS. Now, I have met with all my scholars. So today, during our small group time or our intervention block, I would have this displayed on my flat panel in my classroom. So for example, how it would look like is I'm working a small group with a few scholars, about 4 scholars, and everyone else are working on their Chromebooks. So they're all working in progress learning. So I would have this posted on the board, and they would know which TEK to click on in progress learning to work on, because inside of progress learning, it does come with a video to where it does model them to reactivate their prior knowledge on that particular skill, because we probably not haven't seen that particular TEK maybe might have been a month ago when they were introduced to it. So it's going to come back. So in progress learning, having those videos does reactivate their prior knowledge. So for example, if I'm Tristan, I know I need to focus on 3.2A, but I accidentally clicked 3.2B. So as you can see, Tristan's name is not on 3.2B. So as a teacher, I know that he has mastered that specific TEK, but then also Noah happens to take a glance at Tristan's computer and notice that Tristan is working on 3.2B. Noah can tap Tristan on the shoulder, be like, hey, you're supposed to be on 3.2A. See, look at your name up there. So again, that goes to show that I have modeled to my scholars on how important this specific slide is, because it's personalized to their instruction. Now, as a teacher, it is a lot of upfront work that you have to do. But I promise you, the last 3 weeks that we're in right now, getting ready for our STAR action plan, there's no scholar saying, hey, Mr. Daniels, what do I need to work on? Mr. Daniels, what's next? What? No, everything is already embedded in our classroom and our routine for these next 3 weeks that we have until we take our math STAR test. So when I'm in small group, everyone knows not to interrupt Mr. Daniels, because if you don't know what to do, we have it on the board. So everything is visual inside of the classroom. And with this being said, and sometimes I'll forget to display it, and I'll be like, all right, everybody, let's get on progress learning. The scholars know, hey, Mr. Daniels, we need to see our individualized plan. So when I hear those vocabulary words in the classroom, I'm like, okay, great. Like Ms. Bogan said earlier in the session, being consistent is key. And if you forget, the scholars will remind you. So when they're reminding you, that's a pat on your back to show that you have been implementing and staying consistent of the things you're doing inside of your classroom.
And I just want to piggyback off on something. So little background knowledge, Mr. Daniels and I are actually partner teachers. So he teaches the math, I teach the RLA. So we try to make sure that we are aligned with everything we do in both classrooms. So I know that in math class, they are consistently going over the TEKS. How do I know this? Because the scholars are coming from math class to reading class, and they're saying, Miss Bogan, I mastered 3.H. I got 100 on 3.H. And in my head, I'm thinking I'm the reading teacher. I don't know what 3.H is for math, but the student is very excited about it, that they mastered their skill for that day. So just a little background knowledge for that.
Thank you for that, Ms. Bogan. And then our next slide here, this is another visual for the classroom. So again, like Ms. Bogan said, we are partner teachers. So this anchor chart here is a representation of my 3rd and 4th grade math class. So as you can see, we have our deficit teaks from when we took it from benchmark. And then, so the left side is my 4th grade and my right side of the anchor chart is my 3rd grader. So you can see how we're monitoring and progressing our growth or if we're hitting mastery. So now again, in order to have a student conference, it has to start with whole group, meaning there needed to be something for you to assess, for you to see what are their strengths or their weaknesses in order for you to have this conference. So for example, if you take a look back here at the very first TEAK for 4th grade for 4.3E, you can see that's a readiness TEAK, and you can see on benchmark, they did a 24%. I know. Not a good number I like to see, but hey, that's where we started at. But if you take a look here, I look here on March 4th, we did an 85%, but then on March 5th, we did a 73%. But they still met our class goal because our class goal is we always want to get a 70% or above. So as the teacher, I'm going to dig a little deeper. So I'm like, okay, what questions were assessed on the 4th and how was it assessed on the 5th? Because I see as a class, we decreased. And I don't ever want us to decrease. Now I could take a point or two, but that's more than 1 or 2 points. But for the most part, we mastered it as a class. So now as a teacher, I'm digging deeper to see which specific scholars did not master that skill. So even though we met it as a class, if everybody would have met it, would have been 100%. So that allows me to go back and dig deeper into the data to where I can see which specific scholars did not master that. And that's a self-check for them to come to me to small group to where I can hear their feedback and we're having conversations because these are the scholars in front of me that did not meet that goal for that particular day. So again, that's where the student conferencing comes in when you're pulling them in small group, going over it, and then reassessing them either on the same quiz you gave them, or if as a teacher, if you would like, you could create similar questions. But to make it easier on yourself, I would just give them the same quiz because 9 times out of 10, they're not going to remember they're going to remember the question, but they probably will not remember the answer. So again, don't make it harder for yourself. Don't reinvent the wheel. Just use the same task that you gave them previously. But again, as a teacher, dig deep to see on the 4th, we were at 85, and then on the 5th, we were at a 73. So I would just look at those questions as a teacher to see how was it assessed. But at the end of the day, when we are doing this, you always want to make sure we're conferencing in on those particular scholars that did not meet that mastery on that deficit T.
All right, and that's going to bring us right into progress monitoring for our scholars. So just as Mr. Daniels explained about retesting for those deficit TEAKs, we are currently in our action plan. So these last few weeks, we are testing weekly. So this is an example of benchmark. So what we do in our classrooms is we are going to display our overall scores right here. And as you can notice, we do not have the students' names up there, but we have already conferenced with our scholars individually to let them know like, hey, this was your score. So when we put it on the big screen for everyone to see, this is our whole group conference. And we're looking at the data. We have our individual scores here, and then we have our whole group scores down here. So what we're doing is we're going over it and we're seeing, okay, as a class, where were we? Were we in meets, masters, high approaches, or high did not meets? So what we want to do here is to ensure that the scholars know how they contribute to the overall class goal. And like Mr. Daniel stated, the class has a goal of 70% or higher on all assessments as a class. So that way they can go and look and say, oh, okay, I'm going to look at this line here. I scored a 41. So I wasn't quite at meets, but my conversation with that scholar is, hey, it's all right. You were only a couple questions away. So now what we're going to do is figure out which questions did you have some struggles with, and how can we help you in the future? How can we help you on the next assessment so that you can make it over to that meets? And that's going to lead us right into that frequency distribution chart. And this is what Mr. Daniels had referenced earlier today. So this is going to be a document that you can get directly from Lead Forward. It's going to break down all of the TEKs for you. And this particular chart here is the frequency distribution. So as a teacher, I'm going to look at this tool and see which TEKs are going to be my focus TEKs and which TEKs can we just circle back to or hit, like Mr. Daniels would say, like a drive-by. We can do that every once in a while. So I'm going to look at this bottom TEK here, 5.7 and 5.12, ways to know extended constructed response. Now, although this TEK only shows the frequency of 1, we know that this is going to be on the test again next year because it's new. So this is a skill that with the scholars, we are really honing in on, and where we're letting them know, hey, we're going to focus on these particular skills daily. So it's not going to be something that we hit every other week. We're going to focus on these daily, and we're going to hit that particular TEK during our exit tickets or during our independent practice. And I'm also going to look at this TEK here where it says ways to know, thinking about the meaning. Now, 5.8, 5.9, and 5.10, my conversation with the scholars is, hey, when we're taking the test, and if we see that this is going to be on the test multiple times, and we see that we're still having some scholars that are struggling in here with that particular skill, we know that as a whole group, we all have to contribute to how we're going to increase the number of scholars that are mastering that skill. So we're going to also make sure we're going back first to our independent conferences with the scholars. Hey, I seen that on our last assessment, you scored a 70 on this particular skill. When you do your small groups this week, I'm in small group and you're doing your intervention time on progress learning, I want you to make sure that you're working on this particular skill. And it's going to be the same thing for when you're transitioning over to the math side.
Thank you, Mrs. Bogan. So to piggyback off Mrs. Bogan, so in math, as you can see, these are our 5th grade math TEKs. So to the left in our yellow, these are our supporting standards. And then to the right in the green are the readiness TEKs. So for example, I would use this to help drive my instruction, but also to help personalize my scholars and individualized plan. So for example, if I'm a scholar struggling on 5.2A, and 5.2B. So if you look at 5.2A, since 2017, it's only been tested twice. Versus if you look at 5.2B, the readiness TEK, it's been tested 10 times since 2017. So 9 times out of 10, I'm going to lean more towards 5.2B to make sure that scholar is hitting that TEK to show mastery. And 5.2A, again, I call that like a drive-by. Let me expose it to you. Let me show you how it could look like on the test, because it's not a guarantee that it will show up, but it may. But I want to make sure that you're exposed to it and have a understanding of this. Versus 5.2B, I already know that's going to show up on the test. So I'm going to make sure we're on progress learning on that. And then also I'm pulling you in small group just to make sure. So if you're not mastering that on progress learning, you're definitely going to come into small group with me to go over this TEK. And again, when you are, if you remember from the previous slide where it was broken down into the individualized plan for each scholar according to their TEKs, I would make sure that I would emphasize to that particular scholar, it's like, hey, I see that today you're supposed to be doing 5.3B and 5.3C, but you also have to do 5.3G. So today, I know it says that on your plan, but I want you to hit 5.3G first. That's where I want you to focus on today and then come and show me. So again, you can also have drive-by student conferences as they're working on their individualized plans. So inside of my class, I would be in small group while those scholars are working on those particular deficit TEKs according to their plan. So if I'm assigning my scholars at small group, like, hey, you guys work on number 1 for right now, and I'll be right back. That's when I would get up from my small group and facilitate around the classroom to see, making sure I'm holding them accountable and that they're handling their business, handling their business. So if I look over at one of my scholars and I see they're working on a supporting standard that has not been tested, that is not tested so many times, versus a readiness TEK that they're having a deficit in, I would ask that scholar to stop this particular one, especially if they just started, to focus in on 5.2B. And again, we're getting a lot of these small group times during our intervention block. So when the scholars are with me during that intervention time, I'm trying to get the biggest bang for my buck in that time. And I use this frequency distribution chart to help drive that instruction when I'm having these conferences with my scholars.
So that's going to bring us into effective differentiation strategies. So these are going to be techniques and approaches that you can use within your classroom to promote student growth. So most importantly, we want to make sure that the students have personalized instruction with those TEKs that they have a deficit in. So one thing that you can implement in your classroom are star folders. So as Mr. Daniels mentioned earlier, each scholar has a folder. And within that folder, the cover page has all the TEKs that that particular student has a deficit in. And following that, the student has several pages of different TEKs with assignments to them. So that way, when it's that intervention time, the student is able to look at that chart that's displayed on the board. They know that their name is under 3.3H. So in their folder, they're able to hold themselves accountable and go to 3.4 or 3.3H and go ahead and work on those particular activities. Another way that you can do this is using Schoology. Now, Schoology is something that we have been using for a while now, so the students are very familiar with it. So when they're able to take that test in Schoology or that quiz in Schoology, they're able to actually track their own data. So what I mean by that is when you're making those assessments, you want to make sure that you assign a TEK to it or attach a TEK to it. So that way, when the student is finished with that assessment, they're able to, of course, see their score, but they're also able to select mastery and they're able to see which particular TEKs that they have mastered. And they're able to see which TEKs they still have that deficit in. And the only way that they're going to know how to do this is if you're conferencing with those scholars. And this is something that we do whole group at the beginning of the school year. And it's honestly something for me in my class. We do this within our first 5 days. We go through Schoology, how to access things, and that's something that those first few weeks of school, we're constantly giving them those reminders of, hey, did you check your mastery? Did you check your score? We're giving them those reminders. So by the time we come to March, April, a few weeks right before STAR, we no longer have to give them those reminders. Like Mr. Daniels mentioned earlier, they're actually coming to us and saying, hey, this is what I mastered, or hey, this was what my score was on that, because they know how to do that. Now, what I want to focus on now is this chart here. So this is something that I have been using for a couple years now in my classroom, and it is our individual student data tracker. Now, typically, what I've seen is paper copies or folders of a student data tracker where they're able to write their scores down after every major assessment, like our unit assessments, and they're able to fill in the bar graph. Here, we want to make sure that the students are able to hold themselves accountable. And we want to make sure that we have a student-led classroom. So when we're conferencing individually with the students, we're referring back to this chart. So after every assessment, I'm going to look at, actually, I'm going to go ahead and look at the map reading right here. So for map reading, let's say this scholar had a goal of a 187, but they scored a 180. So the student already knows their goal. Why? Because we've conferenced with that student. We looked at their prior year score, and this is the goal that both of us were comfortable with. And when they did not meet that goal, now we're going to conference again. And the thing that I really love about using this particular document is we're able to leave comments on and in the cells. So where they scored that 180, I'm able to go in and make a comment, or I have some students that like to go in and make their own comments. So that way, when they're meeting with me for their individual conference, we both kind of have an idea of what we're going to discuss during that time because they've reviewed their scores, I've reviewed their scores. And again, this is just another resource that you can use in your classroom, and just make sure if you do use something like this, that you give your students access to it so that they can go in and not change your score. So I would highly suggest only giving them commenter access, but that way they can do everything and hold themselves accountable for their learning. And another thing that we can do to help promote their student growth is skills-based small groups. So as Mr. Daniels mentioned earlier, when you are in those small groups, the students still need to know what they are focusing in on. And the only way that they're going to know that is one, you're having those individual conferences, but two, most importantly, is like the classroom management with those scholars that are not in your small group. If you're conferencing with your students and creating that culture in the classroom, that you want to make sure that you are able to focus on just this small group, the other students should be able to independently work on what they need to work on without constantly having to interrupt you to say, hey, what do I need to do next? I'm done with this. What should I get on next? You've already made it clear with all of the scholars by conferencing with them what they need to do next and what skills they need to work on.
Excellent, Ms. Bogan. Just a friendly reminder, if you guys have any questions, please drop them in the chat. And before I proceed to, with my slide, I just want to ask a question. So far inside of the presentation with the visuals that myself and Ms. Bogan has presented, could you just type in the chat box yes or no if there are any type of visuals in your classroom that you use as far as displaying data, whether it's a whole group type of data or individual data? Just to kind of give us a heads up to see how it's looking like, sounding like, and feeling like inside of your classroom. And again, these are things that we have been doing in our classroom this year, and you're more than welcome. If you are doing it, you're more than welcome to tweak it to see how we're running it in our classroom, or if you have not started any type of visuals or display, our end goal is also for you to take what we have created to use in your classroom, because of course we want your scholars to be successful too, because the things we're doing, presenting to you guys, we definitely see that it's making a positive impact inside of our classroom. And it would be no problem for us to share this with you and for you guys to use it. So if you could just type a yes or no. Thank you, Ms. Howard, for your reply. Well, so we're going to go ahead and circle back to the comments and questions towards the end, but I just wanted to chime in to have some engagement with our audience members, because again, I know it's a lot. It's more of like an informative PD. And for you guys to still be here on a Thursday, because I know you guys were probably running out of school to get home, but it's definitely appreciated with you showing up and participating. So to continue on, these are just other examples of differentiation of instructions for your scholars. Now, again, this is just an example. I'm student one, I'm struggling in 4.6A, 4.2B, 4.5A, 4.3B. Now, again, these are just examples of where this data could come from. It could come from your map report, benchmark, it could come from an exit ticket, it could come from a quiz that you created, or whatever the case may be. Again, your data has to come from somewhere. These aren't things that we're just pulling from the sky. Your scholars have had to have done something tested so you can see the data. So again, inside of in my classroom, again, we post the deficit TEKS, but again, like Ms. Bogan said, we have a STAR prep folder that is created in my classroom, and my scholars know that is their ticket. That is needed every day when you come inside of our classroom. So with that being said, the kiddos can either get on Schoology, they have the autonomy to work in their STAR prep folder, again, having small group. And again, the kids are taking these Schoology quizzes and they're seeing the immediate feedback to see whether they mastered that skill in Schoology. So that's one thing I love about us using Schoology, because the immediate feedback for the kids. And the kids know once you see your data, I need you to report it to me and I need you to track it down. So the same type of way Ms. Bogan's, how their scholars are tracking data in their class, that's how we're doing it in our math class. And again, Ms. Bogan and I try to stay on the same page, so that way either one of us is not creating anything new. We're just finding something and tweaking it to our liking. So these are just different examples for a particular scholar. But again, if you have different type of resources for your intervention, I give the scholars in my room the autonomy to choose. You can get on Schoology, you can get on Progress Learning, you can work on your STAR prep, as long as you're looking at the flat panel to see what your deficit TEK is.
So that's going to bring us into our intervention discussions. So while we are working in those small groups, we want to make sure that the students know why they are in that particular group and why we are working on what we're working on. So this is an example of a classroom here at Thompson, and they have their groups laid out. And this is actually posted in the classroom so they know what teacher they're going with, what group they're going with, and then here is their, we call it Hop at Our Campus, but that's our intervention block. They know what they are working on during that intervention time. So, for example, if I am in group 3, I know that I'm working on author's purpose, and that is what I am working on the entire week. On Friday, I'm going to assess on author's purpose. And while those students are in that group, we're pumping each other up. So, one scholar isn't understanding something, I'm telling them, tag a friend, and that student doesn't get the chance to opt out. So we're okay, we're going to circle back to you, and then you're going to answer that same question for us so that I know that you fully understand what we're working on. And what I love about the culture of our classroom is we've created it to where when we are having those whole group conferences during small group with the students, no one's feeling down about it. Okay, you didn't understand the answer, but the other students are chiming in. They're saying, "It's all right. It's all right. I can help you. I want to answer. I can help you." And they're excited about it because you have to build that culture in the classroom, welcoming. You want to make sure that we're all being kind to one another. And it also helps when we're having those individual conversations with the students. Like, hey, I know you're going to struggle with author's purpose based on the last assessment that we had. But when I pull you to small group next week, I want you to make sure that you're answering and asking lots of questions so that you can get that additional practice in. Small group, that's your time to shine. It's only 3 to 4 other kids, maybe 5, but that's your time to shine during small group. So we want to make sure that one, we have that visual for the student to know who they're working with, who's their group for the week. And we also want to make sure that the students are well aware of what they're working on. So when we're in that small group, we're all on the same page with those conversations that we're having.
Excellent. Yes. So something similar to Mrs. Bogan's layout. So within our classroom, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we start our day with our intervention block. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm housed with my homeroom. So that's when we're doing our intervention. And then Tuesday, Thursday, I'll start my morning off with my third graders to do our intervention block. So as you can see, for example, these are my scholars here who have been struggling here in 4.4H. Along with my third grade scholars, this is what they have been struggling on. Again, according to data from our assessment that we took. So I'm pulling them in small groups. So while these scholars are with me in small group, the other scholars are either A, working on their STAR prep folder, B, they're working in progress learning, C, also I allow the scholars to get onto the flat panel to interact with them to allow them to still do the same skills, but it's technology based. And I find that they love to be on the flat panel, but they have to earn their way onto their flat panel because I love my flat panel. So, but I see when the technology is involved, the engagement is there. But I want to piggyback with Ms. Bogan, like setting that climate in your classroom, making sure everyone is feeling safe and allowing those scholars that who do not like, because we have scholars in our classroom who are timid to talk, but I make sure I try to pull something out of them, whether it's one sentence, I'm applauding them. And when they see me applaud, they see the love from their scholars. So I do love that they're willing to help each other, regardless of what we're working on. They're always wanting to help each other. So that goes to show like that climate is being done because they want all their friends to be successful. Because I'm always trying to hype everything up. Because right now, yes, like Ms. Bogan said, we're teaching, tests, teaching, tests. And I know they're tired. So I always try to make sure they have something to work towards each day, whether it's 5 to 10 minutes of free choice. But in order to have that, you have to set a goal for yourself, meaning you have to have mastery 70% or better. And if you're not showing mastery, that's not a problem. We can do our quick fix, come back to the small group. Let's go over a problem or two. Then you can go back and retake it and still have the opportunity to earn free choice. Because I try to do that daily because again, I'm looking at them and I know they're getting tired, but they know that every day when we walk in, we have business to handle, but they have something to work towards towards the end of the day, because I know they love that free choice or they love to draw. So they're wanting to stay engaged. They're wanting to motivate their peers who are struggling, but they want their peers to be able to have free choice with them. So when I see them collaborating and working together, I was like, let me be quiet because y'all got it. Because he or she didn't get it from me the first time. Hey, do your thing. So I'm always promoting and thanking them for handling their business in here. So again, like I said, during this time of the year, it's teach, test, teach, test. And even as teachers, we're tired, but just to see the small growth or a large growth, it's like, whew, all that hard work is paying off because the scholars who were so making 10s and 20s, you up at 50s and 60s, even though you're not at a 70, but you're growing, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to applaud you, and I'm going to I'm going to make you feel like you made a 100. So that's how big of an impact it is coming from the teacher. And again, when you're having these student conferences, I want to make sure it's personal, not just, hey, you need to do this. No, no, talk to me. What's going on here? So again, it looks different with every scholar when you're having those one-on-one conferences. But I think for the most part, Ms. Bogan and myself, we have really tackled those relationship with those scholars and being able to be comfortable to be straightforward with them to make sure they're handling their business. But then I flip it on them to be like, okay, what do you think you can do? What would you like to see from Mr. Daniels that maybe he's not doing? So I try to hear their feedback because at the end of the day, they have feelings, they want to learn, but I want to know so that way the way what I'm doing, it may not be working. I want to see what do you do? What do you think? Tell me. So again, it just goes back to the culture inside of your classroom on how you're communicating with your scholars.
All right, so that is going to bring us to our questions. Does anyone have anything that they would like to ask at this time, or we can go to the chat?
And as you're reading this slide, you can go ahead and see the takeaway here. Are my students aware of their STAR goal? If so, do they hold themselves accountable? If not, how can you incorporate accountability? So again, this is just food for thought for us teachers to making sure we may think we're doing this, but just to use these questions right here to guide your thinking to say, okay, I am doing it. It looks similar to theirs, but it's different. It may not be the same, but I have my own, whatever I'm doing in my room. And that's okay. Whatever works inside of your classroom of how you're tracking your data, of how you're making it visual for the kids, like that's all that matters. The presentation with Mrs. Bogan and I, we just wanted to show you guys how we're tracking data and making it very visual in our classroom for the kids. Thank you, Ms. Howard. Greatly appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Greatly appreciate that. But again, this is just food for thought for you guys to have here. And again, thank you so much for attending this session here on a Thursday.
I believe we just had a question in the chat.
Oh,
Yes, so Ms. Rios, this can be started from the first benchmark. You can start all of these strategies at the beginning of the school year. And that's something that we did, was we wanted to make sure that we created that culture in the classroom first, because we can't just go straight into whole group discussions about, okay, well, how are you going to contribute to our class goal, or even displaying our scores on the screen without the students feeling some type of way about it. You have to create that at the beginning of the school year and work towards it consistently throughout the school year. See, I'm just going to give you guys a real example. So for my particular group, I actually looped with them from, and I'm speaking on my third graders. I looped with them from second grade to third grade. At the beginning of second grade, this is my first year meeting these students. I have to, work 10 times harder to get those students to adhere to the culture that I would like to see in my classroom. And it took some time. When we would try to have those whole group discussions, it was a struggle in the beginning, because you would hear the little snickers, and they're looking around, they're trying to find out who number 5 is, they're whispering to their friends, but we just have to let them know, like, hey, nope, we're not doing that. We're not laughing, we're not snickering, we're not doing any of that, because we're going to get number 5 from that red, from that did not meet, over to the green, and you guys are going to help us get that student there. So yes, you can start that at any given time, but I would highly, highly encourage it at the beginning of the school year. So by the time you get to where we're teaching, testing, you don't have to reiterate those same things over and over. It's already embedded in them.
Great question, Ms. Rios. Great question.
All right, so we are, oh, there we go.
So we have another question. What can teachers do at this time of the year? Where should they focus? Excellent question. I can go ahead and answer I can
Okay.
relate it to the math side. So if you're here at this point right now of the year, I would be looking at the deficit TEKs, meaning that you should have enough data to see what scholars are struggling with. So instead of coming up with like printing paper, creating star prep folders and all of that, I would put them onto progress learning because again, math, we have it a lot easier because we can go to Lead Forward and type a math TEK in and boom, we have all those questions versus reading. It's a whole nother ball game. But for now, I would just go to progress learning and allow those scholars to work on those deficit TEKs because you can go ahead and start conferencing with those kiddos to tackle those particular skills. But if you want to go a step further, it just depends on certain resources, or if you want to go to Lead Forward to find more star-like questions that are related to what the skills are, to what the scholars are struggling with. So again, progress learning, and then maybe going to Lead Forward if you would like to look for supplemental resource, or even maybe reaching out to your coaches on campus to see what maybe if they have any other resources that you could use during intervention time with your scholars.
And to piggyback off of what Mr. Daniels was saying, while you're putting those students on progress learning to focus in on those deficit TEKs, I would say at this time of year, it may be kind of hard with, the test, the teach test to do as many individual conferences as you would like. So I would start with the whole group conference. You don't have to display, whole group individual scores, but you can display your overall score for that particular test and say, hey, we made a 50 on this, but here's what we're going to do so that next time we come back to this particular TEK, we can increase our score. And this is how you can contribute to that. I want you guys to think about what your particular score was, what category were you in, and how you can move up to that next category. Something simple could be also creating one of the charts that we had displayed earlier, where we have the categories of, the masters, the meets, the approaches, and then just looking at your roster. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are your numbers. So when I put your sticky note up there, that means you're over here. So they had that quick visual of where they are. And you don't necessarily, again, you don't have that time to particularly, meet with them one-on-one, but because you have that anchor chart up, they can still visually see where they are and they know their next steps based on that whole group conference that you just had with them.
Also, I do want to add 9 times out of 10 at this point of the school year, you kind of already know as a teacher who would be passing the STAR test and who are those kids that you can rub their back to get those 1 or 2 more questions correct to get to the meets. And then you may have a few that you can rub to get them to that high approaches. So at this point of the year, like, who your scholars are. And again, Ms. Bogan hit the nail on the coffin as far as creating those anchor charts, because it's easy. Again, it's a visual for the scholar so they can see. And again, they're the ones hyping each other up and you're flipping it back on them. Like Ms. Bogan said, well, what can you do? What can you do to contribute for our class? And then what can you do individually? So again, 9 times out of 10, we know where our scholars are at. And then it's self-check for you as the teacher to tell these scholars their deficit TEKs to work on, whether it's progress learning or whether you're pulling them in small group.